Welcome to Echo Forge, dark fantasy and sci-fi stories from the edges of forgotten worlds. If you enjoy this kind of storytelling, hit like, subscribe, and tap the bell so you don't miss the next vision. Now, let's step through the gate.
What the dungeon keeps. They found the dying party by the light of their own greed. Jarek smelled blood before he saw them. The iron tang rode the damp chill of the dungeon air, mixing with the usual mildew and old stone. Ahead, his partner's lantern threw a restless circle over broken flagstones and moss-slick walls. "Hear that?" Malen murmured. Jarek already had his hand on his sword. Voices, ragged and low, leaked from the darkness ahead. A woman muttering a prayer, a man groaning through clenched teeth, the faint clink of armor as someone tried to shift and failed. "Injured," Jarek said. "Or pretending." Marlene chuckled. "If they're faking, they deserve what they get." They rounded the bend. 4 people lay scattered in the widened chamber, a collapsed knot of bodies and blood. A young knight sat propped against a fallen pillar, one leg splinted with a snapped spear shaft. His breastplate was battered, smeared with drying red. Beside him, an older man in healer's robes knelt over a third figure, another man, a robed caster, his left arm little more than bandaged pulp. And then there were the women. One sat with her back to the wall, crossbow across her knees, dark hair plastered to her forehead with sweat. She looked up as Jarek and Malin stepped into the light, green eyes, sharp and tired, taking them in with the clean focus of someone who'd had enough surprises for one day. The other cradled the mage's head in her lap, fingers stained from the bandages. Dust-gray hair at her temples hinted at years, but her face was unlined, calm in the way of people who have seen everything and decided to endure it anyway. Jarek's first thought was that they were both too clean for this place. Their mail and leather were worn, yes, their faces streaked with dirt and blood. But something about them didn't fit with the broken stone and gloom, like lantern light in a charnel pit. His second thought was, they'd sell for a good price. Marlene shot him a quick look. Jarek knew he was doing the same sums. "Hold," the knight rasped, trying to straighten. His gauntleted hand found the hilt of his sword. The blade barely cleared its sheath before he wheezed and sagged back, lips bloodless. "Easy," Jarek said, raising his empty hands. "We're not with the cult. Just 2 poor souls chasing coin in the wrong hole in the earth. Looks like you've had your share of trouble." "Trap," the healer said. His voice was steady despite the dark circles under his eyes. "Room ahead was warded. The floor dropped. Half our people went into the pit. The rest took the fall, badly." He didn't look at the bodies. There were 2 more, Jarek realized. One under a ragged cloak, shapes underneath too still. Another sprawled face down near the edge of a yawning gap in the floor, limbs at angles that spoke of finality. Jarek clicked his tongue. "Nasty work. You're lucky we came by." The crossbow woman snorted softly. "That depends who you are." "Name's Jarek. That's Malen. We know these tunnels. For a price." He flicked a glance over the wounded. "We can get you out." Marlin laid the performance on thicker, kneeling by the fallen mage. "We've got bandages, salves, a little water left. You're alive, that's more than most. We'll have you on your feet in no time." The healer's eyes narrowed. He knew the weight of pity when it rang hollow. "And your price?" Jarek shrugged. "You pay us when we're topside. We walk together, share the risk." "Fair." The older woman with the dusty hair studied him for a long moment. "I'm Etta," she said finally. She nodded at the crossbow bearer. "That's Lynn. The knight is Sir Edren. Torrin's our healer." "That," she nodded to the mage, is Fen. He needs real rest, not empty promises. Rest he can have on the road, Malen said. You stay here, you die here. Worse, something finds you first. Lin's fingers tightened on the crossbow. Something like you? Jarek smiled without showing teeth. Would we have lit the lantern and walked in if we meant you harm? Yes, he thought. Yes, we would. After a silence, Etta nodded once. You get us moving, she said. You get a share. But you don't lead. I know the way we came. We take my route. Of course, Jarek said easily. He and Malin shared a brief, wordless glance as they started unrolling bandages and offering water. Later, after the fire, after the men were dead, after the women were theirs, they moved slow. The dungeon seemed to resent their dragging pace. Every corridor was a throat, every archway a jaw. Their lanterns threw short, jittering circles of orange light. Beyond that, nothing. A darkness that drank sound. They rested often, at Etta's insistence. Each time Jarek watched Sir Edrin's breathing grow shallower, heard Fenn's low, unconscious whimpers as the healer muttered over him, saw Lin's eyes flick from one man to another, then to Jarek and Marlin, measuring, always measuring. Etta was the quiet center. She walked beside Jarek at the front, one hand always on the rough wall, counting turns under her breath. You know these tunnels, Jarek tried once. Enough to get back, she said, assuming the dungeon allows it. Dungeons don't think, he scoffed. No, she tilted her head. Places remember. You can feel it in the stones. This one's older than our maps, older than the city above. We're the parasites, not the other way around. He laughed, to show he wasn't rattled, and changed the subject. When they made camp in a half-collapsed chamber, Malen leaned close while he pretended to check his boots. Healer first, Malin murmured. Jarek's tongue tapped the back of his teeth. Edrin's the one who can still swing steel. And Torin can still see through us, Malin countered. Kill the knight and the women blame the dungeon. Kill the healer and they blame us. We do this right, they'll need us more every step. He wasn't wrong. We wait for a trap, Jarek decided. Dungeons are generous that way. The trap came quicker than he expected. An hour later, as they picked their way over a narrow stone bridge, spanning a chasm whose bottom their lanterns could not find, the dungeon obliged. The bridge trembled underfoot. Don't stop, Etta said sharply. Weight distributed. The stone cracked. A chunk the size of a cartwheel sheared away, tumbling into the dark. The bridge sagged, a warrior's groan of stone. Torin stumbled. Jarek reacted without thinking, hand shooting out. He caught the healer's forearm, fingers digging into flesh. For a heartbeat, he had him. For a heartbeat, he met the older man's eyes. There was fear there, yes, but also something else. Weariness. A quiet understanding of people like Jarek. Like Malin. Please, Torin whispered. Jarek let go. Torin's fingers clawed at air, then stone, then nothing. He went over without a cry, lantern light painting his face for a fraction of a second before the dark swallowed him. Lin screamed his name. Edran roared and tried to lunge after him, nearly unbalancing the whole party. Move, Marlen bellowed from the far side, unless you want to join him. The bridge shook again. Cracks radiated from the missing piece, racing like lightning. There was no time. They ran. Stone crumbled behind them, falling into the chasm in slow, echoing booms. They reached the far side one by one, panting, staring back at the jagged stump where the bridge ended. Lin's cheeks were wet. She hadn't noticed. Edran's jaw clenched and unclenched, fingers digging into his shattered leg. Etta bowed her head for a moment. When she looked up, her eyes went straight to Jarek. He felt the weight of them. The question there. He shrugged lightly, as if to say, What could anyone have done? After a long moment, she looked away. One, Jarek thought. 4 left to deal with. The dungeon changed after that. At first, Jarek thought it was his imagination. The lantern light seemed to cling more tightly to them, reluctant to spill into the open. Shadows stretched a little too long. Little sounds, drips, distant shifting rock, came a little too often, a little too regular, like breathing. Lynn walked closer to Etta now, crossbow never lowered. Edrin muttered occasionally, half delirious, swearing at invisible enemies. Fen burned with fever. His wound festered despite Etta's careful cleaning and the healer's earlier efforts. "We need to get him out faster," Etta said on the 3rd rest after Torin's fall. Her hands shook as she wrung out a bloodied cloth. "He won't see the surface at this pace." "We're going as fast as we can," Mullane said, "unless you want us to carry him." It was bait, delivered with a smile. Edron surprised them both by answering. "I can drag myself," the knight grated. "Strap Fen to your backs. It's my leg that's useless, not my arms." "You move, you bleed," Lynn snapped. "Sit down before you tip over." He glared but obeyed. Later, when Lynn and Etta argued quietly about splitting the load, Yarek and Malin went to refill water skins from a trickle that oozed from the wall. "Edran next," Malin said under the drip's mutter. "He's half dead already. One good push at the right time, and down he goes. The women cry, but they survive. That's when we start tightening the leash." Jarek nodded while his stomach twisted. Not from guilt. It was an old, familiar unease, like walking across thin ice. They'd done this before. Saved people who didn't need saving, then cut away the parts that didn't profit them. It was simple math. Still, something about the way Torin's fingers had brushed his sleeve wouldn't leave him. "Fine," Jarek said. "We make it a fall. These halls are full of them." They headed back. Fen was dead. They knew before they saw him. The air had changed, not colder. Colder would have been mercy, but stopped. Thick, as if the dungeon itself held its breath. Etta knelt beside Fen's body, fingers pressed to his neck, though there was no pulse to find. Lynn stood by, face hollow. Edron stared at nothing. "What happened?" Malin asked. "His heart stopped," Etta said. "You were sitting right there," Jarek said. "You must have seen something." She shook her head, movements slow. One breath, then another, then nothing. No struggle, no sound, like something pinched the flame out inside him. "There are poisons that do that," Marlene said. "Torin could have—" "Torin would never," Lynn snapped. "And if you say otherwise again, you can find your own way out." Jarek's skin crawled. Fen's face was too peaceful. He'd seen men die of fever and blood loss. There was nothing peaceful about it. "What's done is done," he said. "We can't carry him. Leave the body. The deeper things can have him. The faster we move, the more chance the rest of us live." Edrin made a noise, low and ugly. "You speak of him like a pack you drop when it's torn." Jarek didn't bother to answer. 2, he thought. But he hadn't done this one. They stopped trusting the torches after that. Malene was first to notice. "This corridor," he said later, as they trudged through yet another stretch of gray stone and flaking mortar. "We've walked it before." "All corridors look the same," Jarek replied. "No." Malin jabbed a finger at a crack in the wall, running vertically like a lightning strike. "I remember that, the way it wiggles at the bottom, and that loose stone there. I kicked it." Lynn snorted. "Maybe you're going in circles in your own skull." They walked for another 10 minutes. The air grew heavier. A faint, sour tang hung in it now, like old breath. Then they came to the crack again. This time every one of them felt the wrongness. Etta stopped dead. Edron's hand went to his sword by instinct, though he had no hope of swinging it with any strength. That shouldn't be possible, Etta said. Dungeons twist paths, Jarek said lightly. You said yourself they remember. Remembering isn't the same as moving walls, she snapped. She stepped forward slowly, one hand brushing stone. There are no turnings, no hidden doors. We walked straight. The lantern's flame guttered. For a heartbeat, the light went out. In that microsecond of absolute night, Jarek heard something. Not the drip of water, not the sigh of stone. A breath right beside his ear, wet and cold. Then the lantern flared back, burning too bright for a moment. Everyone froze. They were all a little closer together than before. Lynn's crossbow nearly pressed to Jarek's ribs. Etta's hand clenched around nothing. Edrin had his blade half-drawn, knuckles white. "Did you feel?" Lynn began. "No," Jarek lied. "They walked faster after that. Edrin died without help, too. They'd made it to a room with a low ceiling and a dry, cracked fountain in the center when the knight suddenly cursed and lurched sideways, dragging his bad leg. The stone beneath him simply wasn't there. One moment it was solid, the next it was a pit the width of a bucket, opening like a hungry mouth. His splinted leg crumpled. He pitched forward. Jarek grabbed Edron's cloak out of habit and hauled hard, muscles straining. For a moment the knight dangled, armored weight tearing at Jarek's shoulder. Something moved in the darkness under Edron. Jarek didn't see it. He felt it. A pressure like a hand pressing up through the hole, through the air, through the knight's armor, through him. It smelled like cold stone and old dust, and the sour, sweet stench of rot that never quite reached the nose. Edron screamed once, high and shocked. Then the sound cut off mid-breath. His body jerked in Jarek's grip, went still. His weight changed. The body in Jarek's hands was suddenly wrong. Too light. The armor felt empty. Forcing himself to look, Jarek saw that Edrin's eyes were open, staring. His mouth was slack. There was no wound, no blood, no sign of trauma. Just an absence where a person should have been. He let go. The knight's corpse toppled over, half in and half out of the hole, like a discarded doll. Lynn was shouting something. Etta was at Edron's side, fingers at his throat, then his wrist, then his chest, as if she could brute force a heartbeat back into existence. "Stop," Jarek said. His voice sounded thin in his own ears. "What did you do?" Lynn spat. "Nothing." He spread his hands. They were shaking. "The stone. It opened. I grabbed him. Something else." Words failed. "How did you say something touched him from underneath and took him?" "How many more accidents before it's us?" Lynn demanded. "First Torin, then Fen, now Edrin." "We didn't kill Fen," Jarek snapped. "But you let Torin fall," Etta said quietly. He looked at her. She wasn't accusing. Not exactly, stating a fact she couldn't prove but believed anyway. "I couldn't hold him," Jarek said. "You didn't try," she replied. Marlin stepped between them. "Pointing fingers won't get you out of here," he said. "We're four now. The dungeon wants us. Are you going to help it?" 3, Jarek thought numbly. But the count didn't matter anymore. The pattern had shifted. The dungeon was moving faster than their plan. Something was hunting them, and it didn't care about their petty cruelties. They slept in shifts after that, if you could call it sleep. Jarek woke from shallow, restless dozing, with his heart hammering every time. He dreamed of stone closing over his face like hands, of being buried alive in walls that pulsed and whispered with voices he almost recognized. On the second night after Edren's death, time had become meaningless. Only the cycle of exhaustion and movement remained. It was Marlin's turn to watch while the others tried to rest. Jarek closed his eyes, hearing his partner's soft muttering as he paced. He woke in silence, not the dungeon's silence, that he'd grown used to. This was different, off, like a conversation cut short when you walk into the room. "Malen?" he croaked. No answer. He pushed himself up, every muscle protesting. Lynn slept curled with her back to the wall, crossbow within arm's reach. Etta lay on her side, one hand on a dagger. Both were breathing. Malen was gone. His pack still lay where he'd left it. His bedroll was warm. His lantern sat on a rock, flame steady. "Malin?" Yarek said again, louder. Lynn jerked awake, hand snapping to her weapon. "What? Where is he?" Jarek demanded. Etta was already up, scanning the shadows. The space they sheltered in was small. 2 exits, both visible from where Malin had been standing. No scuffed footprints, no dragged marks, no dropped gear. "He wouldn't go far without his pack," Etta said. "He wouldn't go at all without telling me," Jarek said. Malin was many things, cruel, clever, impatient, but he wasn't stupid. They were a pair. That was how they survived. Lynn licked dry lips. "Maybe he went to piss." "With his sword?" Jarek snapped. "With that look on his face?" "What look?" Etta asked. He didn't want to say it, but the word came out anyway. Afraid. They searched. It didn't take long. There were only so many corners to peer into, only so many times you could call a name before your own voice started to sound wrong. No blood, no body, no sign of struggle. It was as if the dungeon had simply edited Malen out. "Something old's awake down here," Etta whispered, "and it's paying attention now." Something moved at the edge of Jarek's vision. He spun, sword up, but there was nothing. The lantern light danced over rough stone and emptiness, but he knew, deep in the marrow of his bones, that they were no longer walking through anything as simple as corridors. They were in something's hunting ground, and it was done playing with everyone else. From then on, they heard it. They never saw it, not head-on. That would have been merciful. Instead, there were glimpses, a too-deep shadow where there should be none, clinging to the corner of their vision. A patch of darkness that didn't sway with the rest when the lantern flickered. A sense, as real as any hand on a shoulder, of being studied. Sometimes it whispered. At first, Yarek mistook it for memory. Torin's voice wondering aloud whether they'd see the sun again. Malin's chuckle in the back of his mind. Edron's barked orders from some tavern brawl years ago. Then it started using his own voice. "Let go," it murmured, echoing the moment on the bridge. "Please." Jarek gritted his teeth and kept walking. They stopped arguing about a direction. Etta admitted she no longer trusted her own sense of the dungeon's layout. The paths they walked had the looping, recursive feel of a nightmare. Turn after turn, bringing them back to familiar landmarks, always slightly wrong. A crack in the wall shifted 3 inches to the left. A pile of rubble grew or shrank between one pass and the next. Lynn withdrew into herself. Her eyes were raw from lack of sleep. She kept the crossbow loaded, arms trembling from the strain. Once, Jarek found her staring at the point where torchlight faded into black, lips moving. "What are you doing?" he asked. "Counting," she whispered. "Stones?" "Breaths, steps, heartbeats. If I stop, I'll forget which ones are mine." He had no answer for that. They walked. In the end, it took the women before it took him. He'd expected the dungeon to come straight for him, now that Malin was gone, and the men's number had dropped to 1. He was the worst of them, by any measure that counted. Torin would have said so. Etta had nearly said so. He had blood under his nails and coin in his purse, from men and women who'd never seen the blow that killed them. Instead, the dungeon did something crueler. They were picking their way through a section where the ceiling drooped low, making them stoop. Jarek, in the lead, grumbled under his breath as his helm scraped stone. "Just a bit further," Etta said behind him. "I remember this stretch. There should be—" Something thumped, not a roar, not a grind, just a dull, final sound, like a sack of grain dropped from a cart. Jarek turned. Only one lantern burned behind him. Etta stood alone, arm outstretched toward the empty air where Lynn had been half a second ago. "Lynn?" Jarek demanded. His voice bounced off stone and came back wrong. Too many echoes, too much delay, as if the chamber were larger than it was. Etta's hand shook. "She was here," she whispered. "She was right here." Her eyes met his. In them he saw the last guttering of something that had kept her going. Faith, maybe, or stubbornness. "She was here," she said again. Then the lantern behind her went out. Darkness slammed into Jarek like a physical thing. His world disappeared. Breath, heartbeat, cold sweat. Those were the only markers left. "Etta," he said, "stay where you are. Don't move." Something laughed softly in the dark. It wasn't a sound made for human throats. Too layered, too patient. "Etta!" he shouted. No answer. He took a step forward and nearly stepped into nothing. The floor fell away, inches from his boot, an invisible drop. The dungeon had moved again, in the blink between light and dark. "Coward," he snarled into the black. "You take them and hide? Show yourself." The laugh came again, closer now, right beside his ear and also far down the hall and somewhere under his feet. It buzzed in his teeth. "You want me?" Jarek shouted. His voice cracked. "Fine. I'm here." Silence. Then the lantern flared back to life, bright enough to make him flinch. He was alone. No Etta. No Lynn. No footprints leading away. Just the narrow stretch of corridor and the low ceiling pressing down. Something inside him sagged. The anger went out of him like breath from a punctured lung. He was the last. Of course he was. That was how it was supposed to be. The others were weights cut loose, bait chewed up. The darkness had taken its time with them, circling in and in. Now it wanted him. For the first time since he was a child, Jarek found himself whispering a prayer. Not to any particular god. Just words shaped by fear. "Get me out," he muttered. "I'll stop. No more tricks. No more blades in the dark. Just let me out." The dungeon listened. Then the lantern went out again. He didn't know how long he walked in the dark. After a while, he stopped lighting the lantern. It went out every time he did, and the flare then black hurt more than constant night. Better to move by touch alone, one hand on the wall, boots shuffling to test for sudden drops. The darkness wasn't empty. It wrapped around him, intimate as breath. Sometimes it squeezed, the air thickening until he had to fight for each inhale. Sometimes it pulled, a subtle tug at his shoulders, turning him at intersections he couldn't see. It whispered more, now that there was no one else to hear. It used Mullane's voice first. "Easy coin," it hummed. "They were half dead already. We just helped them along." He gritted his teeth and kept going. Then Torrens. "Please." Then Edrin's roar. Lynn's muttered counting. Etta's steady, weary tone describing the paths they'd taken. It cycled through them like cards in a deck, shuffling, dealing. Sometimes it got the words wrong, twisting memories into shapes that fit its mood. "You didn't have to let go," it said with Torrens' mouth. "You wanted to." "I would have killed you later anyway," it said with Malin's chuckle. "This place just beat me to it." "You're all just wait," it said with his own voice. "You always were." He stopped once, leaning his forehead against the cold stone. "What do you want?" he whispered. The darkness pulsed. For a moment he saw it, not with his eyes, with something deeper, an impression of vastness, tunnels and caverns and veins of stone extending in all directions, not random but patterned. a lattice of hollows and solids forming a shape so huge and intricate his mind flinched away from it. In that shape, tiny sparks, people, moving through like blood cells through arteries. He saw himself, a bright stain. Not important, not special, just noticed. The darkness pressed closer, interested in his attention the way a cat is interested in a trapped mouse's last frantic movements. "What do you want?" he asked again, hoarse. It didn't answer in words. It answered by opening. The ground vanished. He didn't fall in the normal way. There was no lurch of stomach, no rush of wind. One step he was on solid stone, and the next there was nothing beneath his boot, and nothing for his other foot to find. He hung in the dark, not floating, not falling, suspended. For a heartbeat, hope fluttered in his chest. Maybe he'd finally gone mad. Maybe he was still back in the chamber with Torin and Fen and the others, lying with a broken neck, imagining this. Then the darkness moved. It flowed around him, thick and slow, viscous. He couldn't feel it on his skin, but he felt it inside his bones, seeping into the cracks. His thoughts slowed, each one dragging a tail of shadow. "Wait," he tried to say. "Wait." Something listened. Then, very gently, it began to pull him apart. Not flesh from flesh, not bone from bone. Those were easy things, crude things. It went for smaller pieces, memories, habits, the grooves worn in his mind by years of the same choices. The time he'd taken a coin purse from a sleeping man. The feel of Malene's shoulder against his in a tavern brawl. The unspoken trust there. The look on a woman's face once when they'd turned on her husband in the dark and told her she was free now, so long as she walked their way. All of it rose up, lit for a moment as if under a lantern, then dissolved. He tried to cling to them, even the worst ones, because they were him. Without them, he was nothing. A shape for the dungeon to redraw. The darkness did not care. "You had your fun," it might have said if it used words. "So do I." Something tugged at him, long and slow. He felt himself stretch. Not his body, that had become an afterthought. His sense of self. The part that said, "I am Jarek, I am here, I want." That part lengthened like drawn wire. He felt other presences in that stretch, echoes of Marlin's laugh, Torin's sigh, Lynn's muttering numbers, Edrin's oath, Etta's quiet stubbornness. Not souls, not ghosts, just impressions of people who had passed through and left their shape in the dungeon's mind. He joined them. For a moment he saw through their eyes, fell again and again, waited in the dark with a crossbow that never got its shot, walked beside a man he did not trust, counted steps until the numbers blurred. The dungeon tasted all of it. Then Jarek's awareness snapped. Not like a rope breaking, more like a thread finally reaching the end of its spool. He had one last thought, vague and childlike. This isn't fair. Then even that was gone. The dungeon folded the new patterns into itself, a snake swallowing one more meal along an endless coil. Above, somewhere far beyond the stone, the city carried on. People laughed, bartered, drank, lived. Stories would be told of the lost party and the two raiders who went to rescue them and never returned. Some would say the dungeon had claimed them. Others would say they'd turned on each other for treasure and all died for it. The dungeon did not care about the stories. It had what it wanted. And deep in a corridor that no longer existed in the way its map-makers believed, the lantern Jarek had carried burned one last time, a tiny flame in a sea of black, before the darkness swallowed it whole.
Thanks for watching Echo Forge. If this story resonated with you, leave a comment, hit like, and subscribe so the next tale finds you. Share this with someone who loves dark fantasy or twisted sci-fi, and I'll see you in the next world.